I'm Sharon Tazwell. Here's your Spectrum News in 90. President Biden facing a Democratic calls for him to exit grow louder by the day. Biden will take questions from reporters this evening during his first press conference since a poor performance at the first presidential debate. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries says conversations over Biden's candidacy continue.
Those conversations have been candid, comprehensive, and clear-eyed. I'm not going to address what any outside stakeholders may have to say about this matter.
The Biden administration is sending new aid to Ukraine. President Biden announced a $225 million package during a meeting Thursday with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. It's one of several aid packages announced by Biden at this week's NATO summit in Washington.
Ukraine will prevail, and I want you to know we're going to be with you every step of the way.
Well, good news for your budget. Prices fell in June for the first time since the start of the pandemic. Federal data released Thursday shows falling gas prices. Used car prices helped usher in the first month-to-month decline since May 2020. The inflation report further bolsters hopes that a Federal Reserve rate could come soon. Well, those are headlines now. Here's your weather on the ones.
Hi there, I'm meteorologist Robert Santos. Friday morning is going to start off warm, even mild in some spots here in the northern tier, 70s and 60s. But here's where it is warm, even hot, 90 degrees to start off in Las Vegas. And then temperatures there in the southwest getting into the triple digits again. Temperatures coming down just a little bit, but still warm here in the northeast with temperatures in the 80s. Mid-Atlantic states get ready for some scattered thunderstorms as we go throughout the day Friday. And this is going to be coming basically going all the way up into the northeast.
This election would be tough, and the past few days have been a reminder that running for President of the United States is never easy. But one thing we know about our President, Joe Biden, is that he is a fighter.
The Biden campaign not going down without a fight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sharon Tazwell. Vice President Kamala Harris pushing back against Democratic division over President Biden's political future. Harris returned to the campaign trail Thursday amid a growing list of Democrats calling on Biden to end his presidential bid. And as Spectrum's Evan Kozlov reports from Washington, all eyes are on Biden as he prepares for a high-stakes news conference this evening.
President Joe Biden is fighting for his political life as the list of fellow Democrats calling for him to drop out of the race continues to grow little by little every day. Many of them saying that the 81-year-old president is not the best candidate to take on Donald Trump.
On Thursday, at least two more House Democrats called for President Joe Biden to drop out. Illinois Democrat Brad Schneider and Michigan Democrat Hillary Scholten, who wrote, "For the good of our democracy, I believe it is time for him to step aside from the presidential race and allow a new leader to step up." There have now been at least 11 House Democrats and one senator who have called on Biden to withdraw from the race. On Wednesday night, Peter Welch became the first sitting senator to make that call.
I'm expressing my opinion. Ultimately, the president's going to have to make his own decision.
The Biden campaign trying to stop the bleeding, sending top advisors to Capitol Hill on Thursday afternoon to make their case to senators.
He has to convince not only members of the Senate, but the people of America.
If things stay as they are, it's likely that Donald Trump will win the election.
I think everyone will be talking over Friday, Saturday, and by Sunday you should have some idea of what's going on.
Despite their growing uneasiness, Biden has so far been able to hold on to the support of party leader Jeffries, saying on Thursday that he's heard the concern from many of his members.
Those conversations have been candid, comprehensive, and clear-eyed.
Following his high-stakes news conference at the NATO summit in Washington, President Biden is scheduled to sit down for an interview with NBC News Monday night, just as the Republican National Convention is set to kick off in Milwaukee. Reporting here on Capitol Hill, this is Evan Kozlov, Spectrum News.
Political correspondent Alex Cohen continues our team coverage from Southern California. Alex, Politico reports the Biden's campaign is making phone calls to delegates, checking on their loyalty. Now, you spoke to a source confirming the move. What are you hearing, and what can you expect to see moving forward from the president's team?
Yeah, this is a very nervous and tense moment for the Biden campaign, and a reminder that delegates pledged to be there and vote in support of their candidate. but it's not an official law. No one's going to get thrown in these rumors that, in fact, the Biden campaign had been calling individual candidates, asking them a bunch of questions, including, is there anything that would stop you from supporting Joe Biden? Also interesting to note that the delegate I spoke with this morning, she's 75 years old. She was on a Zoom meeting yesterday with the senior caucus, and she said out of 50 folks, all of them were behind Biden 100% except for one of them. And she said to older voters, who of course play a critical role in this election, they said all of these concerns that have been swirling around really smack of ageism to them. So it will be very interesting to see how this plays out going forward.
Yes, it will. All right, Alex. So Donald Trump is using the Democratic division to his advantage, as expected, releasing a new campaign ad on Instagram. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
So although I wish I were here with better news, and I are sitting here today because this will be your last week of employment. This is not an assessment of your productivity. You gotta try not to take this personally.
Well, I just had a bad night.
Ouch. All right, Alex, what do you make of that?
I have to say that's one of the more powerful political ads that I have ever seen in my career. For folks who might not recognize that, that is George Clooney appearing in the film Up in the Air, which was all about corporations and layoffs, and they spliced it in with President Biden. This on the heels of George Clooney's powerful op-ed in the New York Times calling on Biden to step aside. And in this world of cheap fakes and deep fakes that we live in, you know, people can see this and think, oh my God, what is going on here? Of course, that didn't really happen, but many see this, you know, op-ed that George Clooney wrote as a message saying, yeah, we are firing a candidate. You know, others in Hollywood speaking out saying, no, 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 we're standing by him. But again, I'm seeing two camps here now, and neither one of them seems to be backing down.
Ooh, it's heating up. All right, Alex Cohen in Southern California. Thanks as always.
You're welcome.
A historic NATO summit in Washington ended Thursday with a new security package for Ukraine. During the three-day gathering, NATO nations made it clear their support for Ukraine is unwavering, but concerns are mounting over NATO's future as questions swirl over President Biden's candidacy. Spectrum's Rena Diamante is in Washington with a closer look.
On the final day of the summit marking NATO's 75th anniversary, President Joe Biden answered Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's pleas for more assistance, announcing a $225 million aid package, the eighth by the Biden administration since Russia launched its new invasion of Ukraine to
pose significant cost on Russia, and you made it clear Russia will not prevail in Ukraine, will not prevail in Ukraine. Ukraine will prevail. And I want you to know we're going to be with you every step of the way.
The announcement is just the latest in a series of commitments announced this week to Ukraine to help defend itself from Russia's aggression. In a forceful address on Tuesday, Biden touted how NATO members have stepped up the burden sharing, long a concern of the Republican candidate for president, Donald Trump. Biden saying that 23 of NATO's 32 members achieved the target level of spending on defense.
We can attribute that to a certain extent to the efforts of President Biden, but more generally, it was a response to the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022.
But domestic U.S. politics shadow the three-day summit, chiefly whether Biden will end his re-election campaign after his poor debate 2 weeks ago, and whether Trump will be elected president again. Trump has been dismissive of NATO.
He would either have much time, essentially ignore it for 4 years. And I think that would be also very challenging for the alliance.
Netherlands will host the 2025 NATO summit next June in The Hague. Still to be determined, of course, is who will be the U.S. president then, and what the election will mean for NATO's future. In Washington, Rena Diamante, Spectrum News.
The price you pay at the grocery store changing. Just ahead on Spectrum News, why some food prices are jumping and falling.
Spectrum News Plus, news from a new perspective, dedicated to refreshing storytelling and empowering communities across the nation, with balanced reporting, providing real context and in-depth coverage.
Here's a look at your forecast across the country.
Local stories, connecting communities. We are Spectrum News Plus. Streaming now on the Spectrum News app and free with your Spectrum subscription.
At Spectrum, we know that internet is a vital tool to help you fulfill your dreams.
My dream is to become a video game developer.
My dream is to get my online college degree. That's why Spectrum has affordable solutions to keep you connected. At Spectrum, we are committed to delivering reliable, affordable internet and unlimited mobile to keep you connected to what matters most to you.
When I never graduated from high school, I realized I wanted to go back to school because I didn't want to work these back-breaking jobs the rest of my life. With the help of my father and having my son, that was all the motive back to school. I felt accomplished, made me feel that I could take on whatever challenges life throws at you.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move. So I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
Hi there, I'm meteorologist Robert Santos. That is generally the forecast for us on Friday. You can see here there is a disturbance off the coast here, the southeast, and this is expected to bring some disorganized, scattered thunderstorms basically all across the Carolinas as we go throughout the day on Friday, all the way into the late afternoon into the evening hours. Then evening into Saturday morning, we'll see some of that even moving into the New England states. So these are going to be scattered thunderstorms. As we go throughout Saturday as well, we're going to see some of these pop-up thunderstorms coming across the Great Lakes down into the Ohio Valley into early Sunday morning. Now, when we look at the risk for severe weather, it's marginal. It's going to be right around the Dakotas, but look at the rest of the country. All is going to be good for Friday. Now, here's the next 3 days here for Bangor, Maine. We've got rain in the forecast Friday, Saturday, drier for you on Sunday with some sunshine, but you notice it's going to be warmer with upper 80s there. In Charlotte, North Carolina, you've got a heat up coming. So enjoy the shower 7 and then partly sunny conditions, mostly sunny on Sunday, with those temperatures getting up into the mid-90s. In Charleston, South Carolina, this is where we'll see those thunderstorms on Friday. It starts to ease up a little bit more on Saturday, but notice the temperatures warming up here as well for the weekend, low 90s. And it's already been a warm one, but add this moisture coming up too from the southeast, and it's going to be feeling extra muggy there. Now, 3-day forecast for Houston. You've got thunderstorms in the forecast for Friday and Saturday, and also a little bit of a warm up come Sunday, drier conditions with temperatures there in the 90s. So it'll be a warm and muggy continued forecast basically for the weekend. All right, the Climate Prediction Center's precipitation outlook here for July 18th through the 24th. You can see the areas in green is where we're expecting a wetter than average outlook. The darker the green, the higher the confidence. And the areas in brown on the northern tier out towards the west, where it expects to be drier than average.
If you're just joining us, here's what you need to know. President Biden's campaign reportedly making calls to delegates to check on their loyalty as some Democrats call for him to drop out of the 2024 election. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries says conversations over the president's political future are ongoing.
Those conversations have been candid, comprehensive, and clear-eyed. I'm not going to address what any outside stakeholders may have to say about this matter.
A historic NATO summit coming to an end with the U.S. announcing a new $225 million security package for Ukraine. It is the latest round of aid since Russia launched its invasion more than 2 years ago. And that's what you need to know this evening. Testimony in actor Alec Baldwin's New Mexico trial started Thursday. Baldwin for Helena Hutchins. The actor was holding the gun that killed Hutchins while on the set of the Western film Rust, but says he did not pull the trigger. Prosecutors are casting Baldwin as someone who flouts rules and has little regard for safety. Baldwin's attorney says the death was an unspeakable tragedy, but the actor committed no crime. Americans impacted by years of rising inflation are finally seeing some encouraging news. A federal report released Thursday shows consumer prices dropped in June as the Federal Reserve weighs whether to cut interest rates. Spectrum News anchor Carla Reddit has a look at what this all means for your budget.
This is certainly good news on the inflation front.
Overall inflation beating economist expectations with a sharper annual slowdown in June to 3% from May's 3.3%.
One in a row is not a streak. We need to see more of that in months ahead, but I think we're hopeful now. Just because we're starting.
The Consumer Price Index report by the Bureau of Labor Statistics showing from month to month something we have not seen in 4 years, a drop in consumer prices by 0.1%. The change fueled in part by falling gas, as well as new and used car prices, while housing, food, and medical service costs still rise.
This, coupled with the report on the jobs market last week, all of that aligning for the Federal Reserve to begin cutting interest rates perhaps as soon as September.
Those cuts would be welcomed as interest rates currently sit at a 23-year high while the Fed tries to combat inflation, making it more expensive to borrow for home, auto, and other loans.
The strain on household budgets is very real, even though prices now aren't going up as fast as they were.
Carla Reddit joins us now from North Carolina. Carla, while some food prices remain on the rise, not all products saw an increase.
That's right, Sharon. Let's face it, one trip all over the country, but some prices have slightly dropped. The Consumer Price Index report shows the prices for fruit and vegetables fell 0.5% in June after being unchanged in May. There was also a price decrease for cereals and bakery products by 0.1% over that month. However, that's about it for the good news in food prices. From May to June, butter and margarine increased 2.4%. Dairy and dairy-related product prices rose 0.6% over the month, and meats, poultry, fish, and eggs increased 0.2%. And Sharon, even beverages rose in June.
You take some of the good with the bad. All right. Carla Reddit in Charlotte. Thanks. Firefighters have traditionally been men, but coming up on Spectrum News, the female first responders working for change.
Here's the deal. In this election year, people need a place to explore national issues that have an impact on their community. To understand those issues better, we're bringing together our team of local political journalists from across the country to break down what's happening. So join us every week to catch up on the key stories making a big difference across the nation and in your local community.
Watch The Big Deal with Errol Lewis Friday nights at 9 Eastern, 8 Central on Spectrum News Plus. Available on all of your favorite devices exclusively on Spectrum.
Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you did, but I heard every word.
We do have some alerts out east related to flooding concerns. You can see it right here in the green. Hi there, meteorologist Robert Santos. This will be part of some of those thunderstorms that will be moving up the mid-Atlantic all the way up into the northeast as we go over the next couple of days. In the meantime, out west, this is where we still have a number of states under some heat-related advisories, even some fire weather watches. The temperatures, yes, have been scorching all week with some improvement now for the Pacific Northwest. It's been coming down little by little the last few days. Instead of triple digits now 80s for Seattle and Portland, but still Sacramento all the way up into Boise and out towards Salt Lake City. And it's going to be mainly the dry heat, but where we have the mugginess factor is going to be down in Texas. Look at 93 in Austin, 86 in Houston. Will feel more like mid to upper 90s there. And that's in a place where many people still do not have power and cannot run their AC in the wake of Beryl earlier this week. And then down in Florida, 94 for Orlando, 91 Tampa, but you add in the humidity and once again we're feeling like it's going to be like it's in the triple digits basically there. So it can be dangerous if you're not taking the precautions for you. So ridge of high pressure out east, ridge of high pressure out west. This is what's been keeping Southern California pretty hot as well. But some improvement. It starts to get nudged to the east just a little bit as we go into the weekend. So that's going to, along with some monsoonal moisture now in a position to come up our way into Southern California, that's going to help to drop those temp triple digits. We'll be back down into the 90s. But here's Friday for you. You could see above average by 11 to 14 degrees still in the southwest, and then 4 to 7 degrees above average. Columbus and Boston, where temperatures will be in the mid to upper 80s there, 90s for many in the southern tier. So 98 in Vegas, for instance, New Orleans right around 90 degrees, and Atlanta right around 95 degrees. Okay, over the next 7, Las Vegas, temperatures do start to drop, but notice they'll stay above average. The average this time of year is 105. So if you're heading out that way, it's that time of year when it does heat up, and it's been hotter than average. Portland, Oregon, 81 is the average, and we'll get some 90s there for Saturday and Sunday. So it's going to be about 10 degrees above average over the weekend. If you're traveling out to Louisville, Kentucky, 89 degrees is the average. The warmest day will be on Monday, upper 90s.
All right, so Redbox is shutting down after 22 years. Its parent company, Chicken Soup for the Soul Entertainment, has filed for bankruptcy and will have to sell off assets to pay back over $1 billion in debt. Redbox's 24,000 kiosks nationwide will be shut down, and over 1,000 employees will be laid off. Redbox is the most recent physical media company to lose the battle to streaming platforms. A recent Forbes survey found 99% of households have at least one streaming service. A new study suggests nearly 40% of adult cancer deaths in the U.S. could be prevented by making lifestyle changes. Researchers at the American Cancer Society say smoking was a leading risk factor in adults age 30 and older. Data shows cigarettes contribute to nearly 20% of cancer cases and about a third of all cancer deaths. Other risk factors: lack of physical activity and excessive alcohol consumption. Drug maker Pfizer is pushing forward with its once-daily weight loss pill. The company says its trials are promising. Results are expected sometime next year. Some experts predict the weight loss and diabetes drug industry will be worth roughly $100 billion by the end of the decade. Most firefighters have traditionally been men. In fact, the National Fire Protection Association says women made up less than 10% of firefighters in 2023. Spectrum's Jenna Ray Gardner shows us how one group is working to change that number for future generations.
Perfect. If I need to get someone out of here, what do I need to get off? The door.
Firefighters are the first responders sent to any 911 call. But the large majority of firefighters you'll see in any department are male.
For me, representation matters.
Jess Rogers and her female co-workers are working to...
That's right. Exposing them a little by little to the things that we do that are just fun.
She wants each of these girls to know that they can do anything they put their mind to.
You see how she's using her body and she's using her legs and her hips to kind of help support? A lot of times that's what we have to do, where these guys can just hold it with one arm, right?
Here at Camp Ignite, 21 girls are learning about the many jobs of a firefighter, some that go beyond putting out flames.
Before I started this camp, I thought firefighters, their only job was to put out fires. When I came here, I learned that they do basically everything.
And so you see how that just like spidered this whole window right here? Would any of you guys like to try?
Arnie Punkross just graduated high school and is trying to learn more about different public service careers.
Nice. I've always thought of firefighters as mostly like a male job. They told us the stats yesterday in our city, at least. There's over 200 male, female. But we got to see almost all the female firefighters, and they're amazing. They can do basically the exact same thing.
The camp organizers say the skills learned in this camp will help in any career. But if even one of the campers wants to be a firefighter, they'll be thrilled. Jess remembers the first time she wanted to be a firefighter. She was 14 when her grandfather died in a car crash, and she vividly remembers the emergency personnel who showed up.
They went to work immediately helping him, and they went to work immediately comforting my family. And so for me, that day just kind of stood out. Sorry. For me, that day just really set a fire in me to know that these are the most helpful people there are.
She's thankful for the first responders who have inspired her in this career, and she hopes she can do the same for this group of girls.
If I'd had this camp when I was this age,
She loves every day of her job.
I'm Sharon Tazwell. Thanks for watching. Your Spectrum News in 90 is coming up right after this short break. Stay with us.
Good evening. I'm Errol Lewis. You are watching breaking news coverage on Spectrum News. It is 7:27 in the nation's capital. That's where President Joe Biden is holding a news conference right now. It's his first solo one since November, his first since the presidential debate, which has some Democrats now calling for him to step down. Let's listen in.
Of free and democratic nations that were compact of collective defense. Standing together, they knew we'd all be safer. An attack on one would be treated as an attack on all. And it's worked because a would-be aggressor knows if they attack one of us, they'll be attacked by all of us. Sending that message is the best way to deter aggression and prevent wars in the first place. For those who thought NATO's time had passed, they got a rude awakening when Putin invaded Ukraine. Some of the oldest and deepest fears in Europe roared back to life. Because once again, a murderous madman was on the march. But this time, no one cowered in appeasement, especially the United States. We collected intelligence that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine months before the invasion. A significant amount of intelligence be declassified so I could start building an international coalition to oppose the invasion. Then in February, some of you remember, I warned the world that the invasion was imminent. I rallied a coalition of 50 nations from Europe to Asia to help Ukraine defend itself. Many foreign policy experts thought, as Putin amassed Russian forces just 100 miles north of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, but Putin thought it was the mother home of Russia. The capital would fall in less than a week. But the Ukrainian people, backed by a coalition to help build, stopped them. Today, Kyiv still stands, and NATO stands stronger than it has ever been. During the week of this summit, several heads of states made it a point in their statement to thank me personally for all that NATO has achieved. NATO is not only stronger, NATO is bigger, because we led the charge to bring in Finland and Sweden into the alliance. And it makes a gigantic difference. Excuse me. Meanwhile, my predecessor has made it clear he has no commitment to NATO. He's made it clear that he would feel no obligation to honor Article 5. He's already told Putin, and I quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." In fact, the day after Putin invaded Ukraine, here's what he said. It was genius. It was wonderful. Some of you forgot that, but that's exactly what he said. But I made it clear, A strong NATO is essential to American security. And I believe the obligation of Article 5 is sacred. And I would remind all Americans, once in NATO's long history, and that was to defend America after 9/11. I made it clear that I will not bow down to Putin. I will not walk away from Ukraine. I will keep NATO strong. That's exactly what we did, and exactly what we'll continue to do. Now, the future of American policy is up to the American people. This is much more than the political question. It's more than that. It's a national security issue. Don't reduce this to the usual testament that people talk about, issues of being a political campaign. It's far too important. It's about the world we live in for decades to come. Every American must ask herself or himself, is the world safer with NATO? Are you safer? Is your family safer? My answer to all those questions is yes. And I believe the American people understand that America is stronger because of our alliances. I believe the American consensus from Truman to Reagan to me still holds today. America cannot retreat from the world. We must lead the world. We are an indispensable nation, as Madeleine Albright wrote. Now let me turn to 3 other key issues. Just this morning, we had a great economic report showing inflation is down. Overall prices fell last month. Core inflation is the lowest it's been in 3 years. Prices are falling for cars, appliances, and airfares. Grocery prices have fallen since the start of the year. We're going to keep working to take down corporate greed to bring those prices down further. Meanwhile, % tariff on everything Americans buy, including food from overseas, vegetables, and other necessities. And economists tell us that would cost the average American working family another $2,500 a year. It's a tax of $2,500 a year. Second, our efforts to secure the border, southern border, is working. After Trump killed the bipartisan effort to secure the border, Republicans and Democrats had worked on, because he thought it would benefit me and make him a loser, Republicans walked away. So I took executive action last month. As a consequence, working with Mexico, border encounters have gone down over 50%. The current level is lower today than when Trump left office. Third, for months, the United States, to bring the hostages home, to create a path for peace and stability in the Middle East. 6 weeks ago, I laid out a detailed plan in writing. It was endorsed by the UN Security Council, the G7. That framework is now agreed on by both Israel and Hamas. So I sent my team to the region to hammer out the details. These are difficult, complex issues. There's still gaps to close. We're making progress. The trend is positive. And I'm determined to get this deal done and bring an end to this war, which should end now. Let me conclude where I began. We're the United States of America. We are the indispensable nation. Our leadership matters. Our partnerships matter. This moment matters. We must rise to meet it. I'll take your questions. I've been given a list of people to call on here. Reuters, Jeff Mason.
Mr. President, your political future has hung over the NATO summit a little bit this week. Speaker Pelosi made a point of suggesting that your decision on whether to stay in the race was still open. George Clooney and a handful of lawmakers have called on you to step aside. Reuters is reporting tonight that UAW leadership is concerned about your ability to win.
UAW just endorsed me, but go ahead.
Thank you. My question for you is, how are you incorporating these developments into your decision to stay? And separately, what concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked vice president who's not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Number one. The fact is that the consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. Secondly, the idea, I served in the Senate a long time. The idea that senators and congressmen running for office worry about the ticket is not unusual. And I might add, there are at least 5 presidents running or incumbent presidents who had lower numbers than I have now, later in the campaign. So there's a long way to go in this campaign. And so I'm just going to keep moving. And because, look, I got more work to do. We've made so much progress. Think about it. Think about where we are economically relative to the rest of the world. Name me a world leader who wouldn't want to trade places with our economy. We've created over 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 1.5 million jobs. I mean, so things are moving. We got more to go. Working class people still need help. Corporate greed is still at large. Their prices, the corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. They're coming down, and so I'm optimistic about where things are going. Danny Kemp, AFP.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about you mixed up Presidents Zelensky and Putin earlier today. And you now have sort of your key president of France, the German Chancellor, having to step in and make excuses for you on that. Officials here are saying off the record that your decline has become noticeable. Hasn't this now, frankly, become damaging for America's standing in the world? Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing by leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? What do you think? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, Putin. I said, no, I'm sorry, Zelensky. And then I added 5 other names. Look, guys, the idea anybody suggests that we haven't had an incredibly successful conference. How many times did you hear in that conference, I know it sounds too self-serving, but other leaders, heads of state, in thanking me, saying the reason we're together the following. Look, folks, this is well, anyway, I thought it was the most successful conference I've attended in a long time, and find me a world leader who didn't think it was. Next one, Nancy Cordes, CBS.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned other instances in history where presidents have faced a challenge, but what makes this moment in history so unique is that it is not your enemies who are calling on you to reconsider your decision to stay in the race. It's your friends, supporters, people who think you've done a great job over the past 4 years. Have you spent time thinking about what it would mean for your legacy, which you've worked decades to build, if you stay in the race, despite the concerns that voters say they have, and you lose to someone who you yourself have argued is unfit?
I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started. As you recall, understandably, many of you and many economists thought my initial initiatives that I put forward, can't do that, it's going to cause inflation, things are going to skyrocket, the debt's going to go up. What are you hearing now from mainstream economists? 16 economic Nobel laureates said I've done a hell of a job. That under my plan so far and what's going to happen in the future if I'm reelected, that things are going to get much better. Our economy is growing. I was determined when I got elected to stop the trickle-down economic theory. That if the wealthy did very well, everybody else would do well. My dad was a well-read, decent guy. I don't remember much trickling down on his kitchen table, and working class people need help. And so what happened is I decided to was able to implement as president what I believed when I was a senator. And that is that The way to build this economy is from the middle out and the bottom up. That way, we grow the economy. And the wealthy still do very well. They do fine. And guess what? Find me an economist, a mainstream economist that said we haven't done well. What have we not done that isn't working right now? And so we got more to do, though. We got to finish the job. And by the way, I come from the corporate state of the world. Delaware has more corporations registered in Delaware than every other state in the nation combined. I'm not anti-corporate, but corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. Doubled. It's time things get back in order a little bit. It's time, for example, if I'm reelected, we're going to make sure corporate rents for apartments and the like and homes are limited to 5%. We're going to make a lot of changes that I've been talking about because we're going to continue to grow this economy. And by the way, I know, remember how I got so roundly criticized for being so pro-union, not labor, union. Well, guess what? I've been the most pro-union labor president in history. Not a joke. And guess what? We had the Treasury Department do a study. When unions do better, everybody does better. Everybody does better. And we talk about how, for example, remember when we talked about getting the computer chip industry back in the United States? Used to be 40% of the industry. We invented the chip. 40% of the industry was in the United States. And former presidents decided that the best way to do it is find the cheapest labor in the world. And so what did I do? I was told not to go over to Europe, to Asia, including Europe, but Asia. And I remember going to South Korea, convincing them to invest $20 billion in the United States to build computer chip factories. And I asked why when they finally decided to do it. And the answer was because you have the safest economy in the world and you have the best workers in the world. So the whole idea here is we've invested, there's over $50 billion in investment in computer chip manufacturing just coming in the bean. None of you thought that would happen. None of you thought that would happen. But it's happening. It's happening. And it's going to grow economies all through. And by the way, red states and blue states. Matter of fact, there's as much in red states as in blue states. I've made no distinction. So my that we can't continue to build and grow the economy, make it fair. And like I said, from my standpoint, when the middle class does well, that's when the whole economy grows. The poor have a shot, the wealthy do well. But the wealthy got to start paying their taxes.
As a follow-up, sir, you mentioned that your Vice President Kamala Harris would be ready to serve on day one. Can you elaborate on that? What is it about her attributes and her accomplishments over the last 4 years that make her ready to serve on day one if necessary?
First of all, the way she's handled the issue of freedom of women's bodies to have control over their bodies. Secondly, her ability to handle almost any issue on the board. This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate she was really good. I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning, she is qualified to be president. That's why I picked her. Felicia Schwartz, Financial Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. Presidency is the most straining job in the world, and it's 24/7. How can you say you'll be up for that next year, in 2 years, in 4 years, given the limits you've acknowledged that you have today?
The limits I've acknowledged I have?
There's been reporting that you've acknowledged that you need to go to bed earlier and your evening around 8.
That's not true. Look, what I said was, instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. And I said, for example, the 8, 7, 6 stuff, instead of starting a fundraiser at 9 o'clock, start at 8 o'clock. People get to go home by 10. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about. And if you look at my schedule since I made that stupid mistake in the campaign, in the debate, I mean, my schedule has been full bore. I've done, where's Trump been? Riding around in his golf cart, filling out his scorecard before he hits the ball? I mean, look, he's done virtually nothing. And I don't know how many, don't hold me to it, roughly 20 major events. Someone with thousands of people showing up. And so I just think it's better. I always have an inclination, whether I was playing sports or doing politics, just to keep going, not stop. I just got to just pace myself a little more. Pace myself. And the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling into 15 time zones a week before. Anyway, that's what it's about. And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time. At the very end, I'm catching hell from my wife for that. Anyway, I'm sorry. Zeke Miller, Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two questions for you. First, on the NATO summit, President Zelensky, in your meeting with him, he pressed you to lift your limitations on the Ukrainian use of American weapons, saying that, in his public remarks afterwards, saying that Ukraine cannot win the war unless those limitations are lifted. Are you reconsidering your position on that? And then secondly, following up on Felicia's question there, leaders of your own party have said that they're not worried about that debate. They're worried about the next bad night and the bad night after that. How can you reassure them you are up to the task and that there won't be more bad nights at a debate stage or somewhere else?
First thing about Zelensky asking for the ability to strike deep into Russia. We've allowed Zelensky to use American weapons in the near term, in the near or abroad, into Russia. Whether or not he should be attacked. For example, should Zelensky, he's not. If he had the capacity to strike Moscow, strike the Kremlin, would that make sense? It wouldn't. The question is, what's the best use of the weaponry he has and the weaponry we're getting to him? I've gotten a more long-range capacity as well as defensive capacity. And so our military is where I'm following the advice of my command, the chief of staff of the military, as well as the Secretary of Defense and our intelligence people. And we're making a day-to-day basis on what they should and shouldn't go, how far they should go in. That's a logical thing to do. Second question related to
Bad nights, sir. How can you reassure the American people that you won't have more bad nights, whether they be on a debate stage or on some matter of foreign policy?
Well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself. And that is, am I getting the job done? Am I getting the job done? Can you name me somebody who's got more major piece of legislation passed in 3.5 years? I created 2,000 jobs this last week. So if I slow down, I can't get the job done. That's a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. But there's no indication of that yet. None. Merrick, Pulaski Radio.
Thank you, Mr. President. How are you?
I'm well.
The elections in the US have consequences around the world. You have pretty high standing in Europe. I just asked President Macron about you, and he said we are happy to have him as the President of the United States. But there is a concern. Many people in Poland and across Europe are worried that the former president may win the election. And there's a lot of concern that Donald Trump may weaken NATO, stop supporting Ukraine, or push Ukraine to give up territories to Russia. Himself was warning just 2 minutes ago about it. So my question is, do you think that Europe will be left on its own if Donald Trump wins the election? And what's your advice to European leaders to prepare for possible US disengagement?
Well, look, I think, how can I say this without sounding too self-serving. I've not had any of my European allies come up to me and say, Joe, don't run. What I hear them say is, you've got to win. You can't let this guy come forward. It'd be a disaster. It'd be a disaster. I mean, I think where NATO, I just learned about NATO or something to that effect. Foreign policy has never been his strong point. And he seems to have an affinity to people who are authoritarian. That worries, as I tell you, from Poland, that worries Europe. That worries Poland. And nobody, including the people of Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine, that that's going to be the end of it. And so what I can say is, I think I'm the best qualified person to do the job, to make sure that Ukraine does not fall, that Ukraine succeeds, that the European alliance stays strong. You may recall, no one was talking about Finland joining NATO. I remember talking to Putin right after we got elected in Geneva, and he was talking about what we should do. We couldn't. And I said, you're looking for the Finlandization of Ukraine, because you're going to get the NATOization of Finland. And about 4 weeks later, I got a call. That's not true. Probably 5 months later, from the president of Finland, could he come and see me? Because in my office, I invited him to the Oval Office. We sat down and talked. He said he wanted to join NATO. Could I help? And I did. It wasn't automatic. And then I got a call from the Swedes. I beg your pardon? And so Finland joined NATO. 800-mile border is a significant, and they're already allies, but they weren't part of NATO. And you heard, I think you heard, maybe, I can't recall whether he said it publicly in our closed meeting, but he wouldn't mind. We decided in Finland, the people of Finland decided they had to be part of NATO. It was in our interest because of the joint ability to be together, to dissuade any attack on Finland. And the same thing with Sweden. It took a lot of selling to some folks, particularly in Turkey and other places, to agree to the expansion. But it expanded. And we're a hell of a lot stronger because of it. We're more secure because of it. And by the way, I was able to get 50 other nations, 50, to support Ukraine. 50. And we were able to bring about a coalition of Europe and Asia, Japan and South Korea. I just met we talked about AUKUS, and we talked about the relationship between Australia and South Korea, the United States. We're making the world safer and stronger because we have to deal with the new arrangement that exists in the world. The Cold War is over. The post-war era is over. What is going to replace it? And I respectfully suggest I have a pretty good idea what that should be. I've convinced a lot of people to follow it. And we're just going to get stronger. David Sanger. Where is it?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Be nice, David.
Mr. President, the NATO declaration that was issued yesterday was very notable because it described China as a decisive enabler of the war in Ukraine for its provision of critical goods to the Russians. That's part of a seems to have cemented in place in the past 2 or 3 years. I think one that you were a little bit doubtful of when we asked you about it some time ago. So I'd be interested to know whether you have a strategy now of trying to interrupt the partnership between China and Russia, and whether or not in a second term you would pursue that, if you could describe that strategy to us. And along the way, could you also tell us whether you think, just to follow up on Felicia's question, that if you were in a room with Vladimir Putin again, the way you were 3 years ago, or with President Xi, that a few years from now you will be able to go negotiate with them handle them one-on-one?
Well, the first part of the question is, we discussed and I raised in the NATO summit, and others raised, the future of do. What they're doing with Russia in terms of accommodating, facilitating, they're getting access to additional, they're not supplying weapons themselves, they're supplying mechanisms for them to be able to get weapons. And China's position is basically, and I've spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader has, over 90 hours since being vice president all the way through, for real. And by the way, I handed all my notes. But my point is that Xi believes that China is a large enough market that they can entice any country, including European countries, to invest there in return for commitments from Europe to do A, B, C, or D, or not to do certain things. What's happened is we have to make clear, China has to understand that if they are supplying Russia with information and capacity, along with working with North Korea and others to help Russia in armament, that they're not going to benefit economically as a consequence of that by getting the kind of investment they're looking for. And so, for example, we're in a situation where, we've reestablished direct contact with China after that, remember the balloon, quote unquote, going down, and all of a sudden things came to an end? Well, we set up a new mechanism. There's a direct line between